Good morning. Happy Sabbath. My name is Courtney, and I'm here with a youth message. So this morning, I want to briefly talk about obedience. Now, that word draws maybe imagery of rules and punishment and that sort of thing, like obey or else. For some people, it might bring up depictions of God where, man, you better do this or that, or you're damned for all eternity. Sometimes depictions or connotations to obedience are not that great, when in actuality, God has made obedience to be a thing that's a blessing in our life. Obedience is not something that is like a slave, right? We're not dogs obeying commands. God has made obedience to Him so much more special. And it's really a submission of our will for His will. And that's really important to understand. It's not following certain rules. It's not following certain guidelines. It's not even following to a T what Scripture says. I didn't say that. What obedience really is giving up your will, taking up your cross to follow God's will. Now, what on earth is God's will? That always seems ambiguous, like, okay, am I doing the right thing? What is God's will? Well, clearly God's will is spelled out in Scripture. God's will is not always a specific decision or a specific action that you take. Taking a certain job over another, you might be seeking God's will for you. Ultimately, God's will is that you go in the direction that you will follow Him most closely. It's a continual obedience to Him. His will is that you obey, but not in this slavish sense, in the sense of submission to God, fill me with your Spirit. And that's why Scripture talks about faith more than works. Especially in the New Testament, this is emphasized over and over again. It is not works, but faith. And we see too, Paul struggling with this concept, or at least, we might just struggle to understand what he's trying to explain sometimes. Paul talks about this, right? In James chapter 2, verse 17, thus also faith itself, it does not have works. It's dead. If your faith does not produce works, it's dead. That doesn't mean that the works, right, is what's happening. You're not obeying rules. You're obeying God's will and desire for you to grow closer to Him. And that comes from faith. That comes from faith. So obedience in the sense of following the rules, doing the right thing, making the right decisions, those things just, you don't even have to worry about figuring out what that means, right? It's going to come naturally if you submit yourself to God in faith. Submit yourself to God's will and let Him guide you and direct you through your life, through the whole thing, day to day. Give that up to God and you will automatically be obeying Him. Let's look at Jesus's very own words. In John 14:15, it says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. But what else does Jesus say about commandments? When He's challenged, what's the greatest commandment? What does He say? His commandments boil down to love God and love people. So when Jesus is saying, if you love me, you will keep my commandments, He's saying, if you love me and you fill your life with me, you're automatically going to seek God and love Him and seek helping and serving others. That's naturally going to come. You're not going to have to worry about these rules because you're naturally falling in line with God's will and His perfect law, which comes through faith and love and trust, not a list, not man-made rules and the status quo. Another verse I want to bring to you is Acts chapter 5, verse 29. It's talking about obeying God rather than man. Obeying God is more important than obeying man. And that's so important. That's so important. God is always first. God is always first, and you can make Him first in your life. Always, 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 especially when you know that something someone is telling you to do is not a reflection of Christ, even if it's a figure of authority, resist that, go for God. And you know what? If negative consequences come from that, I promise you, God sees that and He's with you and willing to carry you through. Don't let other people influence you in a way that's going to separate you from God. Only do things and seek things that are bringing you closer to God. Finally, I want to encourage you from Philippians chapter 4, verse 4. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." Again, rejoice. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Draw the Lord near to you. Seek His presence. Seek His will in your spirit, in your disposition, in your actions, your words, your thoughts. That's what obedience is. Obedience is rejoicing in God and seeking Him first. That's all it is. And that's all it takes. If you want to meet a mark, or you want to live the right way or follow the right rules, just follow God. That's it. Rejoice. Follow Christ's commandments. Love God. Love people. Friends, happy Sabbath. Have a wonderful week.